Okay. Hi everyone, this is SmithyQ from SmithyQ.com, and I'm here to do something a little bit different today. Actually, at the end of most of my videos, I ask you guys, what do you want me to talk about? What would you like to learn more about? And someone asked about the center, which is an absolutely excellent topic. Right? How should we think about the center? What is the center? Why is it so important? Because we all know the center is important. Every book will always say it, right? Center, center, center. It's always about the center. But but why? Why is it so, like, what does it do? What does having control of the center give us? What does it take away from our opponent? And so I want to go into that today. I'm going to talk about it sort of in theory, and then I'm hope to show it in practice. I don't think I can cover everything about the center in one video. That might be impossible, or it might take 6 hours. But I would like to talk about what I feel is the most important element the center gives, and how I think about the center in particular. And so when we talk about the center, of course, we're usually referring to, these squares in the center. And if you're white, every beginner book always says, right, get your 2 pawns here because it controls everything. It controls all these spaces. Okay? But why is that important? Here it is. Here is the reason why. It is like I like to say, chess is played with pieces. When it comes down to it, the most important thing in chess is which side has the better pieces, or which side has more pieces if you're up material, or which side has more pieces on a particular side of the board, such as the king side, right? Because if you have 18 pieces bearing down the enemy king, he could be up, 3 queens. If you're about to checkmate him with your better pieces, you win. Chess is about pieces. And I'm sure we've all seen something like this before. It's like in every beginner video or book or whatever people do nowadays for opening instruction, is if you have a knight in the center, it can control 8 squares. Well, a knight somewhere else, if it's not in the center, it's stuck on the rim. You know what they say, the knight on the rim is grim or dim, or it's something, right? It can only control 3 squares. And yes, that's true. But when you look at this, if you look at this knight, if you just sort of look, beyond that, what does that mean? This knight can go anywhere. So what do let's say there's action on the king side. It's time to attack the king. We can move in. Maybe it's the queen side. We can go to the queen side. Maybe we have to defend, right? Or we have to defend over. This knight can go to any side of the board in one move. Let's look at this knight over here. Where can this knight go? Let's say there's action on the queen side. Oh, it's perfect. But what if it has to defend the king? What if white is doing an all-out nuclear assault over here? Well, then this knight would take what? Let's see, 1, 2, at least 3 moves to get over into the action. 3 moves when white's doing a massive attack, right? It's too slow. And if white controls the center, it's possible this knight can't even get over on this side, right? Because it would have no moves, right? Because it's blocked. Because if you have more space and your opponent is stuck, then he can't use those pieces. He can't use them effectively. Chess is played with pieces. Whichever side has the better pieces almost always wins the game. This includes being up pieces, right? So obviously if you're to win the night, if black's knight were to vanish, or if white's knight were to vanish, doesn't matter how bad this piece is, it will improve and black will be better, right? But chess is played with pieces. And if your pieces are in the center, or they can get to the center, they can influence through the center, then your pieces will be better. What does this have to do with pawns? Pawns restrict pieces, and they can improve pieces. It comes down to the concept of space. When it comes to space, the absolute best illustration I've ever seen is this. Let me share it with you. So if we look at this position, okay, this rook is behind this pawn, and this rook is out here. Look at this rook for a second. It can move anywhere, up and down. It's got all the space in the world. This rook can't move at all. If it does, it loses the pawn. Okay? Watch what happens as the pawn starts moving. Instantly, black space is shrunk, white space is increased. And this keeps happening the more the pawn can advance. Up to this point, well now, this rook can move just about anywhere. It's got complete freedom, and if this rook moves at all, white gets a new queen, right? So at this position, white has maximum space, black is almost nothing, right? So we see that the more the pawn advances, the less black can do. That is space. Now let's look at the opposite as well. What if this pawn can't advance? What if black does this? Well now, white's actually, this rook can't move, the pawn can't move. If the rook moves, black loses. Black will win the pawn, right? And so it's basically the opposite position here, right? So what happened? The pawn was blockaded. If you've ever read Nimzovich's My System, or if you've heard of it, you know about the power of the blockade. That's what this is. When you blockade a pawn, then you, in this case, it's the center pawn, right? Or if the pawn can't move, then it can't restrict. In fact, the pawn is restricting white. Whereas if the pawn can move, the more the pawn moves, the more power it gives to the pieces behind it. That is the secret. And the pawn is, of course, restricting what black can do as well. So the more a pawn advances, the more space it gives behind it. And the more space you have, the more you can move, the better your pieces are going to be. Okay? I'm going to share with you now 2 examples from my own games. Let's see if I can find the first one. Here we go. So this is a random, this is one of the first games I have actually in my private database. I was 1400 at the time, and unfortunately I was black. Opening was fine. Here, many people are worried about the knight g5 threat. Evidently I was. I don't remember playing this game. I just have it here. And I played h6 in this position because I was worried about, you know, knight f6, knight g5. Maybe. Or maybe I wasn't very good and I just played h6 randomly. I don't know. Anyway, the game continued. Pretty much like normal. We reach here. Now this would be a completely normal position in the Italian game if white hadn't castled and there was no h6. Unfortunately, white has, and after this, we have a pretty terrible position because I have no control of the center. In particular, these pawns are going to advance, they're going to kick my pieces away, and I can do nothing to oppose them. And the more they advance, the stronger white's pieces are going to be. Observe, after e5, my knight needs to move, and my knight doesn't have a lot of good squares. If it goes to e4, for instance, it's practically trapped here right now. If it were to be attacked by, say, bishop d3, sorry, I'm trying not to yawn, the only square would be g5. In fact, I think something like this, h4, and then attacking the knight, and now, oh crap, the knight's in trouble. Or playing d5, just kicking the other knight away. Or maybe I just wasn't a good player, and so I just advanced, I retreated my knight. Then after d5, I retreated my other knight. d6. Now look what's happened. White has advanced his pawns. During this time, he's kicked my pieces all the way back. I'm stuck, right? I'm completely undeveloped. This pawn can't move, right? It's blockaded. And this pawn can't move because of the bishop, which means this bishop is stuck. This bishop cannot move, right? It's out of the game. And again, chess is about pieces. Chess is played with pieces. If it's going to take me a very long time to get this piece into the game, that gives white all the time in the world to do anything. As it was, the game only lasted one more move. I brought my knight back out to c6, thinking, hey, it's time. Then white played queen d5 and I resigned because there's no way I can protect f7. Notice what happened here is that white advanced this pawn all the way here, and now his queen can come safely in behind it. And it's heck. And win the game. In what is it, 11 moves? Yeah. So this is proof that I wasn't born, you know, a 2000 rated player. So what happened here is that I wasted time. I played h6, and then white was quickly able to get control of the center. I developed, right? My pieces are on good squares, you'd think that'd be okay, but the center was more important. And then I just got swept away in embarrassing fashion. What's this? That's not how the game went. There we go. And I resigned. But now, I'm going to share with you a better game. Again, I was black. This was played in 2013. Again, it was on the internet. Quick story time, actually. This game was, again, 2013. And at around this time, I was just sort of getting back into chess. I had quit chess for many, many years. There was lots of reasons, right? I was burned out. I went years without improving. It wasn't fun anymore. I had some personal issues as well. But then I came back. I started playing a couple of games just for fun, and I played this game. It inspired me so much afterwards that I became serious again. I started studying. I eventually broke through my old plateau, and now here I am making YouTube videos. So if it weren't for this game, well, things would be different, wouldn't it? It is actually the very same opening, which is why I chose it. That, and I get to talk about my favorite game. And again, there's so much I could say here. This game is fairly deep, considering we were both around 1700, 1800 times. It's hard to tell. On the site I played it on, the ratings were so inflated, so it's hard to say. Let's say 1700. If we look at this position, same opening. Instead of playing the wasted time h6, I played this, and then white played knight g5, which is all the rage. I don't remember learning about the fried liver attack, but everyone seems to play it, right? Anyway, I'm only going to talk about the center here. And so, of course, I play d5. Takes. Now, the best move is almost certainly knight a5, but the move I've always played is b5, the Ulvestad variation. If you've never seen it before, you may be surprised to know that the only move white can play to hope for an advantage is bishop f1. If white plays anything else, black gets, at the very least, a fully equal game. That's how it works. And in all the years I've played it, I think I've played this 13 or 14 times, I have never once seen bishop f1, and so I have a very, very good record with this opening. I'm not going to get into details to explain that, because that's an opening video, and I want to talk about the center. Because watch what happens just a few moves later. White retreats. I move the knight in. This is kind of the whole point of this variation. Then after this, it was take the pawn, Let's look at this position here. So it's white to move. Actually, we'll do one more. So it's black to move. How do we evaluate this position? Now, you can look at lots of things. You could say, white's castled, black hasn't. Development is roughly equal. White's going to play d4 soon. This pawn might be weak, yada yada. So a whole bunch of things you could look at. But again, chess is played with pieces. And pieces are the strongest in the center. This knight is the strongest piece on the board right now. And it's about to get a lot stronger, but I don't want to spoil it. It's in the center. It can go anywhere. This knight's pretty good too. Okay? I'm not going to lie. Especially if it can get to e4. But if it has to retreat somewhere else, right, f3 or worse, h3, it's very bad. It's also not protected, and right now it's not attacking anything. But where can my other pieces go? My bishop can go to b7. It's staring through the center. This bishop can go to c5, staring through the center. If I were to castle queenside, this rook is going to be on the d file right away. It's open. It's in the center. Look at white. Okay, his rook can move over, so his rook can go to the center, but where can this knight go? The c-pawn is in the way. So that means the knight would either have to go to d2, which gets in front of that bishop, or go to a3, away from the center. It's not easy to find a good square for this bishop, because on e3 it can be taken, f4 is impossible. If it tries to go to b2, right, again it's on the long diagonal, but it's staring through a pawn. And so if we look at it through the prism of the pieces, how are they going to be the most active? black's pieces are going to be the most active, especially after this. I played knight f4 with a very particular idea in mind. White's probably the best move for white in this position is d4, because it stops what happens to him in the game. This loses a pawn, because after check, boom, take, 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 I've won a pawn. Things aren't so clear-cut, because my king is in the center, rook e1 is coming, his knight now can go to c3, it's right in the center, his bishop can now go to e3, attacking my knight, so white has freed his pieces at the cost of a pawn. Alright, I'm up a pawn, though. So, I'd rather be black, but white is doing much better in the game. Now, for those of you saying, hey, Smithy, hold on, after this, can't he just play rook e1 and then pin the knight? Well, he could do that, but then after d3, my knight is on the best square ever. Look how it's right in the center. This pawn is fantastic. If I get time to ever do this, white could probably just resign because he'll never get untangled. And I'm up a pawn. I'm up a pawn, and he hasn't freed his pieces. This is probably the best that white could hope for in this position. Going back, instead he played rook e1, which it makes some sense, but it overlooked my reply, because I'm going to play knight d3, he moved back, and then just pause for a second. We talked about the concept of the space and blockading, right? This knight is unbelievable right now. It's in front of this pawn can't move, the bishop can't get out, right? Even if this pawn were to move, okay, well, the bishop can't go to b2 to be taken, a3 isn't much better, right? It's going to take time. This knight can't get out, because near these pawn moves, this knight is forced over here. So this knight is completely crippling everything on this side of the board. Why? Because it's right in the center, it's blockading white. And also, this knight can do anything, right? It could win the bishop if I wanted to, win the two bishops. It's pressuring f2. So if this rook were to ever move, right, this bishop can come out to c5, pressuring f2. It can drop back to f4. It can do anything. This knight is worth its weight in gold. It's absolutely fantastic. And now, I don't want to say I've effectively won here. I'm sure a grandmaster would say that, you know, black has a strategically won position. Black is doing fantastic. And the reason for that is the control of the center, right? White is paralyzed. And now all I'm thinking about is how do I increase that, all right? Well, my bishop, let's make it more active. So I put it on b7. It's staring through the center. He develops his knight, right? It hits my pawn. That's great. So I'm going to play a6. If we just look at this knight is now way over here. It's out of the game. What happens if action comes over here on the king side? It's going to have to spend all this time to come back in, right? That's sort of what happens, right? It's going to take like 18 moves for this knight to get into the game. Well, my bishop is developed in one move. Or my next bishop is developed in one move, hitting his knight. And notice, because my bishop is on such a good square, his knight can't go to the square it wants to. It could go to f3, but then I might take it. He has terrible pawns, so he decided to go to h3. And look how terrible that knight is. Look how terrible white's position is. This knight can't go anywhere. Black controls all these squares. This is impossible. This knight doesn't have much better of a future. This bishop can't move. His rooks have no open lines. He is paralyzed. When I then castled, I got my rook in the center as well. And I'm actually threatening, in a way, to play knight takes c1. So if you're to play king h1, I could take the bishop and then win a pawn. But I don't think I would have done that. Because my position, that knight, if you look at this bishop, it can't, as long as this pawn can't move, this bishop is out of the game. As long as this bishop is out of the game, this rook is out of the game. So this is 5 points, that's 3 points. You know, this knight then is stopping it's almost worth a queen, right? It's blocking 8 points. So would I trade a queen for a pawn? No. So my opponent defended the threat. He played rook d1, so that way if I were to take, he could take with this. He doesn't lose a pawn. I wouldn't have done that. But now the question does become, what do I do here in this position? I'll give you a moment to think. For the record, I spent 40 minutes on this position trying to think of a move. Because clearly my position is great. It's fantastic. White has nothing. He has no threats. I can do almost anything. But what do I do? What the main move I was thinking about, or the main move my brain kept wanting to play, was this. It wanted to play e4. That was sort of it. Which makes some sense, right? It's moving in the center, and it's protecting my knight. But look what happened here. This pawn can't move forward anymore. It's effectively blockaded, because if I move it again, it's just going to be taken. Right? So it doesn't move. So this pawn is frozen. And it's just blocking my own bishop. By moving the pawn, right? This bishop is just worse. And now this knight can go here, or this knight can go here. By moving the pawn, I've actually given my opponent more space. I've lost control of the center. If I could keep moving the pawn forward, this might be something worth considering, but I can't. And so I suppose my main problem was I had to think of something besides e4. I could think about something like rook e8, right? Because that makes sense. It's perhaps the most logical move. Bring the rook into the center. But then, what do I do next? And I couldn't answer that question, because the only thing this rook is going to do is help push this pawn. But whether there's a rook behind the pawn or not, it's still blocking my bishop. It's still giving his knights squares. So what I had to realize here is that I have control of the center. I don't need to control the center anymore. I don't need to do more things there. Once you have control of the center, you can now attack anywhere, because you have control. I can attack the queen side, because this knight is stuck out of the game. Or I can attack the king side, because these pieces are out of the game. It probably makes more sense to attack the king side, because, again, there's all these pieces here, there's only one piece defending it. How do I attack the king side? It didn't seem obvious. At first, I'm thinking about moves like this, or something, right? But that clearly doesn't really work. And what I eventually realized, sort of the aha, the eureka moment, the light bulb, was I have two bishops. I have two rooks. What do rooks need? What do bishops need? They need open files, open diagonals. And I suddenly realized, it was a flash, that if these pawns were to just disappear, White probably loses immediately. He could resign, because we're just going to move rooks over, and they're coming down. This bishop is slicing through. This bishop will come here, and we could just see that White has no defenders. All my pieces are coming in. I'll kill him. Like, it's that simple. So let's get rid of lines. Best move I've ever played, g5. It's not because it's tactics. You know, I calculated 8,000 variations. It's not because of any other reason you would think a move is the best move. It was the ideas behind it, of realizing, to me, that the center is fine. I control the center. Now I can attack the king side. How do I attack it? I advance my pawns. I open lines for my pieces, right? At the time, I never really thought that way, and which is one of the reasons I never got beyond, 18. I couldn't do it. I was only calculating. When I started thinking in general like this was sort of when I advanced. And this game helped me in a very big way. So, and the threat, of course, is, well, yeah, if I play g4, this knight is trapped. Notice also, that's not as important. Again, I want to keep this at the center. I want to keep this short because I don't want this to take an hour. So he played king f1, g4, knight g1, bishop c5. Again, my pieces can do anything going in, putting pressure on this pawn. He can no longer defend with rook f1, so he has to play knight e3. f5. Look at this. It's controlling the center, it's controlling everything, and the more my pawns advance, the more space I get, the less space White has. He tried to lash out with b4, and I back up, but notice how this is just how this doesn't really help him. It's just another pawn in the way of his bishop. Now, if his bishop does manage to get to a3, it's staring at its own pawn, right? It's too bad. And then white played f3. If you can think of a better move for white, I would love to hear it. The problem with this is, again, it's opening lines. And so, sure, after take, his knight is now improved slightly, but he can't. My pawns can march forward. My bishops are lancing through. I've now got the g-file for my rook. And the game doesn't last much longer. I push with the pawn. He advances. Normally playing rook g8 would be what I want, but then he's got knight e7 with a fork. So I move to f8 instead. He moved back. I'm advancing in. I'm just going to go through quickly here. Notice how, even here, white is forced to have his pieces, on terrible squares, right? His knight would love to be anywhere else. If he could get his knight to e4 instead, he'd be laughing. But he can't. Couple moves. And he won an exchange. Good for white. But everything is coming at him now. He has no control, and it's actually a really nice finish in this game. Great move. I'm gonna give my opponent props. Instead of resigning, he allowed me this perhaps the prettiest final position I've ever seen. I've ever produced myself. From here, from this position, once I played let's admire my pretty picture here. Once I played g5, and I just advanced my pawns, my position played itself. Why? Because my position was so much better. Why? Because I had controlled the center. The entire game, white could never oppose these squares. He couldn't even oppose these squares, the bigger center. By doing that, my pieces were more powerful. Again, I was only around 17, maybe 1800. It's hard to say because I had such a long time off. I was very rusty. But once I got in this position, it was so easy. So much so that let's see, right here, I was able to calculate giving up an exchange, and it was easy because my pieces are just so strong. And then we'll end it here on the final position. Okay? So just to do a quick recap, right? Chess is played with pieces, right? And so I'm not often thinking, when I'm playing a game about controlling the center, I'm thinking about how do I make my pieces better. And it always comes back to the center, because if my pieces are in the center, or they go through the center, or they're aiming at the center, then they are better than if they're not, than if they're, this knight over here, which has to move. You always want this knight. And so if you're always thinking, how do I make my pieces better? You're going to naturally think, or you're going to gravitate towards the center. And then that's going to help. And then we can also see the power of the blockade, right? If we can stop our opponent from advancing, right, then, well, he's stuck. It's terrible. And we can also see the inverse, right? Advancing our pawns, how it restricts him, how he has much less, how he has to move his pieces to worse and worse squares. That is the power of the center. Chess is played with pieces, and if you can get your pieces aimed at the center, they're going to be better, and you're going to win. Or, at the very least, you won't lose, right? Okay, so that's that. There's a lot more I could say about this game. There's a lot more I could say about the center, but I think that's it for one video. So again, tell me if you like this, if you didn't like it, if there's something I can do to improve. What other things would you like to hear me talk about? Right? Again, I love talking about chess, so leave a comment. You can like, subscribe, do that stuff. That'd be amazing. You can come to my blog, SmithyQ.com. That'd be great. Message me on chess.com. Whatever. I love talking about chess. And, okay. That's that. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.